right. Very good. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the WealthVest Bull&Bear. Drew and I are joined today by Christopher Clarke. He is a professor of economics at Washington State University and a very skilled user of internet media, I would say. I probably am aging myself by coming up with the best term I could find was internet media, but we'll just go with that for now. Chris, will you take 2 seconds and tell us what exactly it was that compelled you to become an economist, and then let's talk a little bit about the economy.
Yeah. So economics for me was the study of everything. You're an undergrad and you think the whole world is interesting and you can't settle down. And then I discovered economics has insights into basically any type of human and even natural interaction. So it's because I didn't want to settle down and I want to know how the whole world worked. And here I am.
And you've been at Washington State for a while now?
Yeah, so I actually did my PhD here a decade ago, and
Oh,
then I
okay.
went away. I worked at University of Houston for a while, and I loved it there. Someone retired up here, and they invited me to come back, and I've been back about 3 years.
How did you enjoy the heat in Houston?
Well, I grew up in Vegas, so I mean, you get the
Okay.
whole life story here. But
Yeah.
Houston's heat, of course, has humidity where Vegas doesn't.
Yeah.
July and August were hell on earth in Houston, but the rest of the year was all right. The rest of the year is all right, and
Yeah. Yeah.
because you're in the academy, you can leave town a little bit in July. So,
Yes. Yeah. As someone from Memphis, I feel like I actually understand what summer in Houston feels like with when 100-degree heat and 100% humidity.
oh no, that's completely unbearable. Because I was like, oh, the temperatures aren't bad in Houston because Vegas can get up to 110 in the summer,
Yeah.
but Houston at
Oh,
89 degrees is worse because of the
oh yeah.
humidity. Yeah.
Oh yeah. You're sweating as soon as you walk out the door at 7:30 in the morning.
I know you breathe the air, and the humidity kind of goes away a little bit in the winter. And I remember every April, the humidity would come back, and you just feel it. You feel it coming in, and to touch the atmosphere is such a weird experience.
Yeah, exactly. So the reason I wanted to have you on the podcast is I love your videos. I love your explainers. And I think what they're good for is I think they work for somebody who hasn't even taken Econ 101, but they're also incredibly informed for somebody like me who has been studying macro and economics his whole career.
Oh,
So,
cool.
and what
Thanks.
I love about your videos is that you're passionate about this stuff, right? There are things, there are misperceptions, there are things that get repeated on TV, on CNBC all day long that are just
Yeah.
very often wrong.
Right.
And let's
Right.
just start with that. What is kind of the one misperception in today's economy or in today's markets that you
Yeah.
feel like just is wrong?
That the economy is getting worse, or it's terrible, or worse off than our parents or grandparents, or that everybody's just in the tank. The perception of the economy is totally different from the reality that people actually live with day in and day out. And it does. It ticks me off, and I think about it deeply. Why does everybody so dour about the economy? And a number of reasons why. One, the media, as you mentioned, they have to sell. And
Mm.
unfortunately, because of human psychology, the thing that sells as negativity is sensationalism. And that's what sticks. But science and reality don't care about negativity or sensationalism. They want representative samples. They want to talk to hundreds of thousands, samples, huge samples, even millions of people in the sample. Or in some of our cool data sets, we basically have the whole census. We have almost everybody in some of these transaction data sets. And when you start looking at the world through a scientific lens, through
Yeah.
representative samples, when you look at everybody, not just your friends and acquaintances in your social circle, and not just the headlines that go viral, you find out that the quality of the median American family has never been better. Never been better in the entire history of humanity. I mean, this should be the headline, but no one talks about it.
Well, that certainly is a good one. And look, we do live at a time where you can kind of stovepipe your information, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like it swings along partisan lines as well, where depending on who the president there and depending on what your political party is very much going to define how. And you see that you certainly see it in the Michigan surveys. You certainly see it in the NFIB surveys
Yeah.
nowadays. Do you
Yeah.
feel like the soft data has become almost worthless?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, yeah, the Michigan survey, that's referring to the consumer sentiment that makes headlines every time, which is it's a great survey. But yeah, since COVID, it's really disconnected from the hard measures of how we're doing. It used to track pretty close. Now,
Yeah.
partisanship, because that's one hypothesis. Well, it's partisanship, but they break it down by
Hmm.
party,
Hmm.
and partisanship has been growing since the '70s, so it's not new. It's
Right.
getting worse. Every 4 years is worse than the previous 4 years in terms of partisanship.
Yeah.
But I don't think that explains the post-COVID disconnect. There's a lot of hypotheses out there. I don't think we
Mhm.
quite know yet. But has it become worthless? It certainly has become less indicative.
Yeah.
It correlates with the hard variables a whole lot less in the past 5 years.
Yeah. It's in like the NFIB outlook was recently before the election. Most small business owners tend to lean to the right. And
Right.
the NFIB survey, I mean, it was as negative as it was in like early 2009. Like, if anybody thinks that the economy last year looked anything like 2009, they weren't paying attention to 2009.
No, no. I think that's the other thing that has shocked me. I mean, all the viewers are of a certain age. We all remember the financial crisis really well. And me, as a millennial, trying to go out into the workforce, and I decided to go to grad school to delay that whole process. That was a thing. Like the economic pain from 2009 to 2013 or so was extraordinary.
Yeah.
And I feel like we all, like society, we all forgot what that was like,
Yeah.
making comparisons when we have an unemployment rate of 3.5% in 2022,
Yeah.
and we're trying to make comparisons with 10% of 2010. It just boggles the mind.
Chris, when you talk about how the economy is good in a lot of measures, I mean, people can get TVs now without financing and washing and dryer machines. But how much of this perception might be like Gen Zs who are like, I've got to wait till I'm 40 to own a house now, or 38, as opposed to my parents got
Absolutely.
one at 23
Right.
and
Absolutely.
all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up, Jew. That's the number one area. That's the number one economic problem we do have. When I say we are better than we've ever been before, this is like the average of all the experiences in the economy. But certainly many aspects are great. Entertainment, even groceries. Groceries went up during the inflation period, but groceries are still more affordable than they were in 1990 in terms of the share of your budget going to them and other measures. But yeah, clothing's gotten cheaper, furniture's gotten way cheaper, appliances way cheaper, especially controlling for quality. Oh my god! But housing, no, far less affordable. Now it's tough to make some of these measures, especially if you're comparing to folks who bought the house in the early '80s. What were interest rates in the early '80s? So you have to instead of just looking at the raw price of a house, you'd have to look at the mortgage payment, which would include the interest rate, or you could look at rents or some other measure that don't have to take into account interest rates. And yeah, by basically every measure, housing is far less affordable than it used to be. Um, and this, yeah, well, this has been happening, yeah, I'd say in the past, well, a little bit before COVID, probably since 2018 or so. We recovered after the financial crisis. But even if you compare 2005 to the '80s, 2005 is worse than it was in the '80s for housing. And owning a house is how people build their wealth. Most of their wealth does it. I mean, folks have retirement and F401ks and all these things. And half of America owns some stock. But I mean, as you guys know, everyone has some wealth, but the vast majority of the middle class's wealth is held in their real estate. So yeah, this is a huge problem. But if you weigh everything together, we the standard of life and the quality of life today is still better than
Yeah.
it was 40 years ago.
Yeah. It is extraordinary because you think about consumer confidence being as weak as it is, and yet headline unemployment is what it is. And wage growth has been as strong as it is, even though it has,
Yeah,
on a real basis, it has been a little bit more debatable. Drew,
yeah.
you wanted to ask another follow up question, I think, around the Gini coefficient.
Yeah, sure. I know you've done quite a bit of work in inequality. There's a lot of talks about yawning wealth gaps in the United States now.
Yeah,
Kind of
yeah.
looks like the Gilded Age in terms of Gini coefficients. I'm wondering if you could explain what is the relationship between huge wealth gaps and then decreased social mobility over time? Like, how do those things interact?
Yeah. Well, you keep bringing up the negative parts of the economy, which is important because we have to
Yeah.
we have to
Yeah.
solve we have to solve these problems.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the solution to housing was we just have to build more housing.
Yes.
But inequality is a different kind of problem than everything I mentioned so far. When I say we have a better quality of life, that's what we call an absolute measure of quality of life. Meaning, I have better health, I live longer, I have a bigger house, my cars are better. But that's comparing it with yesteryear. Um, Inequality compares with the rest of the people in my society. How am I doing compared to the richest 10%? Or how am I doing compared to the median person? And what we found, over the past 40 years, especially starting in the 70s and especially 80s and 90s and kicking off, is the poor people are doing slightly better. The median person is doing better, but the top 10%, especially the top 1%, are
Yeah.
are astronomically better. And so some people say, "Hey, we shouldn't care about this. This is not a really big deal. Let the rich people just be rich. That's fine. All boats are going up, which is true. So why do we have something to complain about?" But in the history of the morality of economics, economists have cared about relative inequality just as much as your absolute standard of living, because we're social creatures, and the concept of fairness matters. And you if you start hanging out with folks from the 1%, you realize just a different life that they live from your life. And so it creates these social divisions. And as a democracy, we have to figure out how to work together. And, we're social creatures, as I say. We all have to get along. So, meaning common culture or common rules or a common sense of fair play, that everybody has an equal chance to get into the 1%. If we all work hard, if you work hard, you invent something cool, or you do something, you should have an equal chance as anybody else. But what we're seeing is that there's these barriers, huge barriers to social mobility, meaning that if you're born in the bottom 20%, what's your likelihood of ending up in the top 20%? Likewise, and this goes the other way, everyone talks about moving up, but if we lived in a perfectly meritocratic society where it doesn't matter where you're born, everyone has the same opportunity, we all go to the same quality schools, we have the same chances to invent stuff and start a new business and make money that way, then you should find that even if you're born in the top 20%, 1/5 of them should end up in the bottom 20% if we had a pure meritocracy, but we don't. And that lack of fairness certainly is a big moral problem that we're facing with today.
Yeah. Charlie Munger was so eloquent on every topic, but he was so eloquent on this topic. And he
Yeah.
talked about it in terms of envy, right? I mean, human beings are much wealthier, better standard of living, live longer, better cars, better, all that. But the envy you never get away from as a human being. And when you do have such extraordinary wealth, and I think that one of the issues, and I think what's creating somewhat more political bifurcation, is that you do have a lot of young men who look at their opportunity and they say, I'm not going to be able to buy a house. I mean, we've got all these kids who live out in Bozeman. And they're like,
Yeah.
how am I ever going to buy a house in Bozeman when the average house is over $1 million?
Oh my
But
goodness.
let's talk a little bit about just kind of current state of the world. And I think one thing that's been interesting is the one big beautiful bill that just passed.
Right.
And I don't know if you know Lynn Alden, but Lynn Alden has a phrase that she talks about. Nothing stops this train, and she's talking about the fiscal train driving so much of the consumption, so much of the demand that we have in the economy, that we're driving these massive deficits, and that it really has been this fiscal force that has overwhelmed the monetary or any other brakes that might be put on the economy. So I just want to get your thoughts on the one big beautiful bill, and then just the fiscal spend that is kind of, at least I would argue, kind of overwhelmed what I think historically would have been a more cyclical economy.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, so you kind of have two questions there. One is the big beautiful bill in general, which touches lots of things. Well, I guess we'll focus on the deficit component of it, and then the second question is the role of deficit spending in cyclical smoothing. So kind of alleviating our recessions, but on the other hand, more than that, because we're in good times and yet we're still using these huge deficits. How much is it pumping the economy even in good times, so not
Right.
necessarily cyclical stuff.
Right.
Yeah, those are both good questions. First of all, just the big beautiful bill. Huge tax cuts relative to the existing law, the status quo law. Most of those tax cuts are at the top, so inequality will be exacerbated by this bill. There are unrelated to the bill, of course, as all these tariffs. That's being done without legislation, very controversially. And so some people say those tariffs are going to offset some of that. The tariff revenues are even with super high tariffs, going to be relatively small. The fact is, the United States is just a gigantic country, and even though we have an open economy, we trade with the rest of the world. We're so much bigger than we're about the same size as China, but we're both huge countries. Trade is relatively small, and so it's just not a huge tax base, even if we were to tariff the hell out of it. Um, but the other thing about tariffs is those taxes are consumption style taxes or intermediate good tax. About 40% of our imports are intermediate goods, going into the manufacturing sector and other primary industries. Um, that's going to be felt by the middle and lower classes. So it's a tax increase for the middle and lower classes, tax breaks up at the top. Overall, if you add all this together, the deficit is slated to increase by about $200 to $300 billion every year. That's on top of the already close to $2 trillion deficit we currently have. Now, this is extraordinary. If we talk about what we do in cycles, we took out. Well, let's go back to the 90s. In the 90s, due to Clinton and H.W. Bush a little bit before, and the internet boom, we balanced the budget. Then we get to 2001, you get a tax cut. We fund a war. W. Bush expands Medicare Part D prescription drugs, and he does that without raising taxes. So the deficit starts to go up a little bit. Then you get the 2008 crisis. Huge amount of deficit, both presidents, W. Bush and Obama. And that's fine. In fact, that's what we want to do. We want to take out huge deficit during a difficulty because it prevents the unemployment rate from going higher, prevents human suffering, and helps us get us back on our feet. Lots of things. In fact, a lot of people argued we should have taken out even more in 2008, 2009, and 2010 because it took the economy to like 14 or 15 to fully recover.
Paul Krugman, most notably.
Right. He's the most prominent one on this. And some economists disagree, but I think the median economist today would say, yeah, we probably could have done even more deficit spending in the late 2000s there. Which is fine. But then in the back half of the 2010s, that's when you should have been raising taxes and cutting spending because the economy was great by that point. So we want to do this counter-cyclical spending. That's kind of your Keynesian style, and that's what he argued for back in the 30s. But we didn't. Instead, we did a tax cut, the 2017 tax cut. That and the effects of that weren't bad. They didn't like boost the economy. It was kind of, but they made the deficit from shrinking, which it should have done. The deficit stayed flat or grew a little bit. And then you get COVID, and we successfully, this is totally bipartisan, and the United States did way better than the rest of the world in this, is we took care of people. We spent $5 trillion in stimulus spending in 2020 and 2021, spread out over those 2 years. And the unemployment rate snapped back, and the economy recovered faster than other countries recovered. And the amount of economic suffering was like none or next to zero due to COVID. Whereas we could have had something worse than 2010. Sure. No financial crisis in 2020 either, because the economy, there was plenty of money going around. But then this for the long story here, but this is where I got surprised. I thought by 22 or 23, the deficit would start to really shrink, not just like bounce back to where it was before, but I thought we would really shrink it. And instead, the deficit continues its kind of long-term trend that we started since, the 2010s.
Yeah.
And this
You're
bill,
exactly right. I mean, if you look at deficit as a percentage of GDP, we bounced around the median, and then at 2017, it really has inflected lower. And we've never, ever run deficits this high at a time of low unemployment. When you look long term, you tend to have high deficits when you have high unemployment, and vice versa. And
or during a war.
And now, since 2017, we have just changed that direction. That deficits are continuing to rise regardless of the rate of unemployment. And I, like many, kind of wait to see a reaction in the 10-year and the long end of the bond.
I know.
When do the bond vigilantes show up? And nobody knows the answer to that question.
I know. I thought because well they during the election season, so we've known this is coming for over a year because they've been running on this, and I've been wondering the whole time when are we going to see a repetition of Liz Truss in the iceberg lettuce.
Yeah, yeah,
Because that's what happened to her, you know. 'Cause
yeah.
she wanted to run some, and it was even modest. Her proposal, she wanted to increase the deficit a little bit by her bill, these huge tax cuts, and the bond vigilantes in the UK said no, and then they backed off.
Right.
Not happened here yet. The bill has passed. It came into law. Everybody knows it's going to increase the deficit. But yeah, the 10-year has reacted modestly. I mean, it's not
Yeah,
not
yeah,
nothing
yeah.
nothing that big yet.
Well, I guess, we do have the exorbitant privilege, as they say, and the
Sure,
UK does not.
sure.
But let's talk about OBBB. That's a mouthful, and then and tariffs, because as you point out, with the bill you get tax cuts at the high end and with corporations and pass through taxes, accelerated depreciation, but any
Right.
and every study away from the CEAs, which is non-credible, really shows really just absurd. I mean, what I'm looking at Stephen Moran on Bloomberg right now. But this is going to be certainly regressive, right? And I think
Absolutely.
that
Yep.
is the part and then when you add in tariffs, which you said before is a consumption tax, and of
Yeah.
course it's a consumption tax that is regressive, and that if you make $1 million a year, you don't consume $1 million a year, but if you make 50 grand a year, you probably do consume everything. Can you
Yep.
talk a little bit about how that regressiveness of the tax code could impact the economy, in your opinion?
Oh, well, inequality will go up. So folks' sense of fairness will continue to, say. And you use the word, the word envy before.
Yeah,
I mean, that's obviously there. Human beings are envious creatures, but I think it's bigger than that. I mean, when you read Adam Smith, for example, when he talks about the morality of the economy, he never used. In fact, he hates envy and he hates greed. And but he does talk about a sense of fairness. That everyone earns what they get. That we all want to be beloved and respected by our peers. So I think, yeah, the opportunities that will be available for the lower middle classes will be less because of this bill. I mean, they're cutting Medicaid substantially.
right.
8 million people going to be kicked off their health care, and they want to say it's work requirements, and that's what it is in writing. But what it actually ends up being, according to the experiments we ran in Arkansas, tried this, and Georgia is currently trying this, is it ends up kicking working people off of Medicaid. So if you kick sick people who are working off of healthcare, they're going to become more sick, and that's not going to help them get more jobs. It's not going to help the economy do more stuff. So that's one aspect is if you lower the quality of the safety net at the bottom, the amount of economic productivity at the bottom and upward mobility coming from the bottom will decrease. So that harms our kind of long run economic growth capacity. I think the biggest aspect of the bill will be the deficit spending and the crowding out, what we call it. I all the models are kind of showing that the 10-year rates and others are going to be elevated relative to otherwise, because the other aspect is this huge deficit spending stimulates the economy, and more spending is happening. It increases the demand. Everyone's going out there and buying stuff with all these tax breaks. Well, that has an inflationary pressure. And so the Federal Reserve has to respond to that inflationary pressure by keeping interest rates higher. And that is more expensive. I mean, we're already spending $1 trillion a year just paying the interest on the federal government's debt. So I'm kind of touching a lot of things here.
Yeah,
The modeling is showing the economic effect in terms of like total GDP growth is modest, or even harmful, depending on what happens with the interest rate. And in terms of its effect on inequality, that will harm the all the human capacity we have at the bottom will be underutilized.
yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And I'm glad you mentioned that Arkansas example too, because I was kind of blown away that the other day the Wall Street Journal editorial staff wrote that there's no evidence that
Shocked by that
people
too. I
will
read that
be.
same one. I read that same one.
And I was just shocked by that because I got to think that the staffers on the Wall Street Journal editorial page know better.
Yeah. It was one of those because I thought it was just some because I didn't see who wrote the op-ed. I just read it because they were like,
No, it
oh,
was an
it's
editorial. It was their editorial staff. So it was their flag
yes,
staff. Yeah.
yes. I was shocked by that because I thought, well, these guys are smarter than this. Like, and everyone's talking about the Arkansas experiment, or currently what's happening in Georgia. Now Georgia's had to modify it, and they're have to continue to work on it. I mean, Georgia spent $55 million on this employment verification system, and that's one state. The big beautiful bill only allocates like $100 million for the whole country for an employment verification system. I mean, it's not designed to easily check if you're working or not. It's designed to increase red tape.
With the Fed, video where I think you had been asked a question about the president interfering in the
Oh
in
yeah.
the in who the Fed chair will be, and him trying to kind of intimidate Powell out of the seat. Bessent has surprised me by his willingness to go along with this game. Talk to me a little bit about what you think the long term or the immediate impact would be if Powell were to say, you know what, fine, you get your wish, I'm out. Go ahead and put in, Hassett.
Well, his term ends in 26, so it's not that far
Yes.
away.
Yeah.
Um, so we're gonna see the scenario either way. Yeah, curious about Besant. Yeah, we all thought that. I mean, he's obviously a smart guy and has a tremendous amount of capacity. But once he wrote that op-ed saying tariffs were good, ignoring 2 centuries of economic study and science, yeah, the reliability of his comments in terms of conforming to, a
Yeah.
scientific approach to the world was compromised. Um, but okay, so what's the scenario here? The scenario is Powell leaves early.
Let's not even say Powell leaves early, but let's
Okay.
say next it's 2026,
Yeah,
it's Kevin Hassett or it's Stephen Moran or it's somebody who is seen as a political chair. One of the things I've argued is, look, it may not be as big a deal as people think because the
sure.
C in FOMC stands for
As a
committee.
chair. Yeah. Oh,
And
committee.
I
Yeah, chair of a committee. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but I think people, because there's so often unanimity within the Fed,
There
I think
is.
people have the perception that the Fed chair controls everything.
Right,
So I,
right.
I would just be interested because to me it's a question of credibility, and to me we are
Yeah,
already losing our fiscal credibility. Well, we
yeah.
better try to hang on to our monetary credibility.
Right, right. I mean, just as a success story, in 2022, when we're having inflation of 9%, it's the role of the Federal Reserve to fix that. Well, they raise interest rates to like 5%. For reference, last time we had double-digit inflation, Paul Volcker in 1980 had to raise interest rates to 19%. Why the gap? I mean, you can say all these different reasons, but one of the reasons for the gap is because everyone believes the Fed now.
Right.
And inflation expectations the whole time, even in the face of seeing 9% CPI headline, inflation expectations remained fairly flat. I mean, even the 1 year inflation expectation, I think, only got up to like 3-ish or 4-ish% at most. But the 10-year inflation expectation never got above 3%. Um, why? Because everyone believes the Fed. They have a tremendous amount of credibility. Everyone believes that they'll do it. And playing with expectations was one of the most powerful tools the central bank has. And it's such a weird tool because it's purely psychological. But we're social creatures and we're humans, and psychology can work on us, even in our institutions. So it does. You're right. If you hire a political appointee, someone without competence, that can send a bad signal. Now, in the case of Hazlitt, I mean, Hazlitt is an accomplished economist. He's published in top journals and done well there, but he's turned so partisan over the past 10 years that it would be problematic. The Fed board is full of Democrat appointees and Republican appointees. Jay Powell is a Republican, and he was reappointed by Obama. I mean, Greenspan famously a Republican, a libertarian, very small government-minded libertarian economist.
I hope that wasn't a Freudian slip.
Oh, how did I say it?
Just saying that that he was that as the
Oh,
Chicago school
small-minded.
small-minded.
Oh, no. In fact, if I was at my other office, I'd show you. No, everyone has tremendous respect for Greenspan. He's a totally smart bloke. Very deep thinker. But that small government minded. But he's reappointed multiple times by Clinton. And then Bernanke is a Republican, but he's reappointed by Obama. So the quality of the people and the individuals they hire to be on the board of governors in the Fed are professional, are serious. They're 14-year long terms. And they usually get by. Usually they'll get by quite bipartisanly. And that's one reason why they get close to a consensus, because of the professionalism. It's every 6 weeks they get together, and most of the time it's pretty obvious what you need to do. And even in the times where we're not quite sure what to do, the amount of people who disagree are like 2 to 3 out of the full committee. You're absolutely right. Hiring one political chair will change the dynamic of the committee, but the law is the law. The committee is still rules by majority. And the rest of the appointees, many of them can be there for 14 years if they choose to. Most don't. And I often wonder, if we get a political chair and the whole Fed becomes far more politicized than it is today, will some of the old timers decide to stick around for the full 14-year term? Because before, like, it didn't matter. Like, you serve your time, you get bored, you do another thing with your life.
Yeah.
But if it starts to matter more, I could imagine some of those board of governors could stick around for their full 14-year term.
Yeah. They'll put off going out and making a little more money.
Yeah.
We mentioned Bessent a little bit. Bessent has surprised me. Bessent talked about his 3-3-3 plan.
Okay.
And, Bessent's 3-3-3 plan was, we're going to raise oil production in the United States by 3 million barrels. We're going to achieve 3% real GDP, but at the same time, we are going to lower deficits to 3% of GDP. So cutting deficits in half, cutting deficits by over $1 trillion.
Sure.
And none of that feels like it will come to pass. And none of it, even really on the face of it,
not even
seems
oil?
credible.
I don't know. Every president since 2011 has increased the amount of oil we've produced. I mean, once we invented fracking, all 3 presidents we've had since then have. You can't even tell when a president got elected. It's just a line, outside of like COVID and stuff.
Yeah, politics gets way too involved in, or people believe politics is far more involved in oil production when it's really about science. We went from 7 million barrels a day to 13 million barrels a day in production entirely because of science. And it was a science that all the analysts in the late 2000s believed, this is stupid. This is never going to, this is oil companies doing what they do and spending on science projects. But the fact is that the Permian is getting pretty mature. And that at $60 and $70 oil, what do you have? You have oil companies saying that we're going to return capital, we are going to sit on reserves, we're going to generate free cash flow for our investors. So there was just no world in which you were going to have oil prices down, so disinflationary, and at the same time have 3 million more barrels a day of production.
Yes. Okay. Coupling 3 million barrels along with sub $70 a barrel a day. Yeah. No, I've seen the projections. All my buddies at UH who are more knowledgeable about energy markets. Yeah, they post these capital expenditure projections from the firms, and they're all saying, we'll spend a bunch of capital, meaning we'll drill a bunch of stuff only if it's above 70 barrels of oil. $70 for a barrel of oil.
Yeah.
Which, okay, so I could see that.
And then the other,
3% growth and then deficit. Well, they just passed a bill that's doing the opposite of that, expanding the deficit. So, and that's now law. So that's not a question of debate.
But in terms of, it gets us back to that fiscal spending question. Do you think it was possible, it would have been possible, or is possible, that we could cut deficits by as much as let's say we really did put together the one big beautiful bill, really raised revenue and cut spending and really took deficits down to 3% of GDP, which would be long-term sustainable.
Yeah.
Do you think we could have maintained growth? Or do you think that by definition, had you cut fiscal that much, you would have had far less than 3% real GDP?
Oh, that's a good question. No, ceteris paribus. So that's the Latin phrase. Ceteris paribus. They correct me. My Latin speaking. It's a hard C. Ceteris paribus in the Latin. It means holding all else equal. So what's the marginal effect of this one policy? Yeah. You cut spending, increase taxes. That slows down the economy relative to otherwise. So the question is, could you do that and then couple it with other things that help growth? Number one, all this disruption and uncertainty with trade, very bad for growth. I mean, we're the Yale Budget Lab puts out numbers of 0.5% to a whole percent GDP growth, the negative effects from tariffs. So let's say we kept the free trade, kept the stability there because stability also matters for increased business investment, and that's a key component to long-run economic growth. The place where we could see, the kind of the positive sides of growth are coming from the technological and productivity improvements from AI, and those potentially can be quite substantial. So, yeah, I'm a generally optimistic kind of economist. I would say 3% growth would be at the high end, but within a possibility if we had stable policy, pro-growth trade policies, and then
Yeah.
pro
Yeah.
pro investment policies, either in cheap energy to help fuel AI.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about productivity because look,
Yeah.
one of the great things that we have had in the United States, why we've grown faster, why we've created more wealth is partly productivity. And I think,
Absolutely agree.
it's partly that we've got the Mag 7, right? Which I was just looking, by the way, this is not really pertinent to the conversation, but the Mag 7, the
Okay.
market cap of the Mag 7 is now 60% of US GDP. Just 7 stocks.
So this okay, so we're comparing the stock with the flow. But
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And I don't want to get off on that tangent. I really do want to talk about productivity because, look, if we're going to have 3% GDP growth,
Yeah.
we have basically zero family formation growth right now, right? Because we don't have immigration.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so that means that productivity has got to carry the whole 3%.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good
And
point. Yeah.
and like, look, I'm not a Luddite. I believe that productivity will be higher as a result of AI, but economists, have a hard time predicting productivity and
Oh,
how and
it's very
when
hard
it
to do.
plays out.
Yeah.
So how do you think about productivity? How do you think about the productivity from AI? And remember, just think about, I started my career in 1995 and I
Yeah.
didn't have a computer on my desk.
Oh my god. In 95, no computer on your desk.
In 95, no, well, I was checking trades. So I would get these big dot matrix printouts,
Oh my goodness.
in an equity world. But
Well,
I
now,
didn't
now I
certainly,
now I have to ask, at what year did you get your first computer at work? Was it 98?
no, it was right there and then. But
Okay.
I'm saying,
Okay.
but even
Yeah.
then, I didn't
That's
have
about the
email.
transition.
You know,
Right.
I
Yeah.
didn't have email, right? I was we were still faxing the morning meeting to clients.
Yep.
You know. So anyway, so let's talk a little bit about productivity and how you see productivity sort of playing out.
Well, I guess show of hands among the three of us who have used ChatGPT in their work life to do your job in the past 7 days.
Well, I haven't used ChatGPT, but I do use the Google AI function, and I'm more and more blown away by it.
I use ChatGPT.
Yeah. I used so yesterday I needed to make this data visual animation. And I've learned a bunch of tricks over my years going through grad school and all these coding tricks, but I didn't know how to use the software at all. I've never used GIS to do it before. And I had ChatGPT tutor me through the whole process. It'd get out some code, I'd plug the code in, it wouldn't work, I'd tell it why the error code, and then it would give me a suggestion. And I did that for a few hours, and then I got the whole thing to work. Extraordinary, just extraordinary. This is transforming things. Huge potential. I think on the equivalent of the spreadsheet back in the 90s. Now, the story of the spreadsheet's a good one because everyone thought that would replace accountants. It did replace what we call bookkeepers. So if your job was, quote, a bookkeeper in the 90s, that job doesn't exist anymore. But accountants became more productive. So it's kind of this question. There's going to be winners and losers. Some jobs are going to win, some jobs are going to lose. Wages will adjust accordingly. Not everyone will be replaced. I remember, since I grew up in Vegas, that automation was going to be able to replace. There was this report that came out that said automation was going to replace 60% of the jobs in Vegas. So Vegas is a blue collar town. Everyone works in the casinos. It's a tourism town, and everyone serves the tourists. And just because something can be replaced doesn't mean you will be replaced. Because when people come to Vegas, they want to be served by a human, even if the process could be done automated in some capacity. So some things will get automated, but not everything will. There's this cost and benefit. AI is not free. And so not everything that can be done by AI will be done by it, because sometimes it's cost prohibitive. For example, when I was using ChatGPT, I uploaded all these huge files, and it read the first one and it did everything I wanted it to do with it super fast. I didn't have to code. But when I asked it to upload everything, it got bogged down and it timed out, because they didn't want to spend the resources to do it. So it just showed that just because it technically can do it doesn't mean it will, because it's very expensive. So labor is expensive. ChatGPT or AI in general is going to have cost, and things will be weighed out there. But in the end, some of this early experimental evidence showing they give the same task to people with the AI and people without the AI. We're talking 25 percentage points increases. We haven't seen that since the railroad. It can be. Now this is early stuff, so who knows if it'll pan out. But I view it as probably equivalent to at least what we saw in the 90s, bare minimum. Over the next decade. And speaking of over the next decade, we've only had this sucker for 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
Speaking of 1995, I think that's the year AOL came out. Personal computers have been out since the 80s, and yet they still hadn't penetrated the workplace. Not until the late 90s did everyone start getting that. Excel spreadsheets, again, 80s is when that starts becoming a thing, but it's not till the late 90s that it becomes universal. So the application of AI in your day-to-day, or these large language models in your day-to-day, that's going to take a decade to pan out.
Yeah. And
that
you
kind
don't
of
see.
brings.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Drew.
Just that, not to segue, but a few years ago, AI felt very theoretical, and I feel like quantum computing's at that level right now. So what we think maybe quantum computing is another leg of productivity that we don't fully appreciate it where it's going until maybe 4 or 5 years down the road.
Maybe. Yeah. I know we're not supposed to make predictions, and I will definitely not make a prediction about quantum computing. Oh, I guess we should talk about some of the bad parts that we are seeing with it. Where is the pain being felt? Because the case with like bookkeepers in the 90s, they just got better jobs doing something else. What we are seeing is ChatGPT or these other large language models benefit lower skilled folks more than upper skilled folks. Upper skilled folks already had the skills, so they just do it themselves. So you're like, oh, that's great. That'll be the great equalizer. Yes, but you're not going to hire interns anymore, because the AI will just do it for you. The entry level positions. And the one place we are seeing it in the real world data, well, two places. One is like freelance graphic artists are being replaced right now. That's not a huge industry, so that's not terrible for the economy. But the big place is that we are seeing it is tech hires who are new grads. So a new stat was rolling around the internet the past week or two, showing that the unemployment rate for computer science grads was higher than philosophy grads, which has its reputation. Now, is this temporary? Is this just caused by the overhiring in the tech sector in 2020, 2021, and we're still just seeing that overhiring cycle play out? It might, maybe 5 years from now, that cycle will be over and return to the other way. Or is this a result of the increased large language models? We don't know yet, but it is likely that newer grads are going to have a tougher time getting these entry-level positions if these entry-level positions get automated. And so we're going to have to think a lot about that as a society, on what do we do for the 21-year-olds, because all of us, when we were 21, we did basic stuff at work, and that's how we learn. You got to start somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point because yeah, I learned checking trades. And next thing
Yeah.
you know, you're doing more interesting stuff, but you
Yeah.
learn the basics of how it's like Schoolhouse Rock, right?
Yeah.
You learn the
Yeah. Yeah.
very basics and you can go from there. Um, yeah, I mean, you know, there was well, Krugman had the note the other day on his Substack where he cited that recent college grads unemployment rate is the worst it has ever been versus the overall unemployment rate. And you juxtapose that with the fact that that young white collar workers are having a tough time. But at the same time, the NFIB will tell you that 40% of companies can't find somebody to fill an open role. And if you look at the trades, you know, electricians, plumbers, welders, you know, there you are really, really meaningfully short of workers. And it does seem that that capitalism will work that out. And all of a sudden, I would think that as a skilled electrician, as a skilled plumber, you've got a very good wage story in front of you for the next 10 years, whereas
Yeah.
computer scientists might struggle more.
Well, I hesitate making too close of a comparison. Now, the lowest paying computer scientist versus the highest paying plumber, absolutely the plumber's doing better. But that there's a whole distribution, right? So there's a
Sure,
distribution between them. And if you look at the median versus the median, your CS major's making double or triple.
sure.
Your median plumber. So your median plumber's actually just doing okay.
Right.
But if you own your own business as a plumber or an electrician and you're, in the top 30%, you're great. You're better
Yeah,
than me. Right? You're
yeah, yeah.
doing fantastic. But that's kind of the story. Like this trade schools. Trade schools fix this. Trade schools are great. Obviously, these are very important roles in the economy. But not yet, at least. I'm not seeing. So if you have a shortage, wages will rise, and if you have too
Yeah.
much, wages will fall. But I'm not. Yeah, I have a hard time seeing a future equilibrium where your median plumber's out earning a computer science major. Maybe, we never know. But
Yeah.
we'd have a long. In other words, I guess what I'm saying is we'd have a long way to go before we find that outcome.
Well, it's also and I think everybody seems to be making this um, what has been economically incorrect to say that, well, if you have meaningful productivity innovation, you're going to have mass unemployment, right? We all learned about, you know, the cotton gin, right, as kids, right? I mean, like you didn't have mass unemployment, you created new opportunity. That productivity created new businesses. Those new businesses hired those people. There can that creative destruction, if you will, can create some ugly periods along the way, but
Yes.
ultimately
Yes.
capitalism and innovation works.
Yeah, I spent some time in Scotland, so I'm going to go way back in history. I spent some time in Scotland last summer, and I loved it. It was gorgeous, and I'm learning about the economic history. And I read this book called The Scottish Clearances afterwards, because the Scottish Highlands used to be filled with farms, small farms, and they got cleared out. Sometimes it was violently, so lots of tragedies are happening there, and other times it was, well, they just found better jobs in the city, or they immigrated to America or something. That's why we have a lot of Scottish descendants here in the U.S. But what the story was in the long run, they usually did it to do sheep, so they replaced small farms with huge herds, and the land was farmed like 5 times more productive. I mean, it wasn't even close.
Right.
But that how long was that transition period? That transition period was like decades. It took a number of decades for it to fall out, and there was a tremendous amount of pain along the way, and folks got uprooted. These communities that had been around for centuries didn't exist anymore, and now they need to find a new life either in a city or across the ocean in that case. And what would be that story today? It can still take decades. Very famously, there's this paper called Engels' Pause, and it's named after Friedrich Engels, and not written by a commie, so we don't have to worry about that. But they call it Engels' Pause because Friedrich Engels was one of the first to notice in the mid 1800s. Now the Industrial Revolution's been happening, in England since the late 1700s, and yet the quality of the median worker did not improve until about 1850. So you have 70 years of improvement where the capitalists are doing great. They're rising new class, challenging the old landed aristocracy, and that's wonderful. But your working class person is still on subsistence wages. And it's not till 1850 does poverty, for the first time in human history, start to seriously be eliminated. And that's a 70-year transition. How long is today's transition going to last? Is it just going to be a decade? Is it going to be like those very painful ones of the Industrial Revolution, the clearances, the Luddites, all those others? Or is it going to be something like the bookkeepers in the 90s, where they'll find a new job pretty quickly better?
Yeah.
I don't know. This is yeah, the current trajectory could have some serious pain. We don't know.
Yeah. No, I agree that we don't know. I wrote a bit of an angry essay. I forget the guy's name, the CEO of Anthropic AI. He
Oh,
had
okay.
put out, you remember he had put out a thing where he said, we're going to have 10% GDP growth and 20% unemployment.
No, that's bullshit.
That's what I said.
Yeah.
Where's the demand coming from? But anyway, let me ask you one, because if we're talking about multi-generational trends, one of the things we've talked a lot about is the disinflationary impact of globalization, of China becoming part of the WTO, of goods pricing really disinflating for 40 years, what economists call the great, what do they call it, Drew?
Great moderation.
The great moderation.
Moderation. Yeah.
And now we are reversing that. Yeah, and now we are reversing that. So the question becomes, well, are tariffs just a one-time price reset, or are we really going to go through a long period where instead of having optimal production, we're going to have redundant production? And therefore, deglobalization is going to be a negative for long-term productivity growth. And productivity matters so much, as you know, because it's productivity that drives wage growth. It's productivity that ultimately drives prosperity.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so I guess the question is globalization, especially with China, but globalization in general has been a huge boon for increasing productivity, lowering prices for consumer goods and durables and other things we manufacture abroad, increasing the prosperity of the American person. And now that process is either being slowed down or even possibly reversed. Well, the question is, well, how big are these tariffs going to be? That's kind of been the million-dollar question over the past, 1 year since over the course of the campaign. A lot of numbers get thrown out, but then what actually happens? And the fact is, the tariffs on the ground, not just the announced ones, but the tariffs on the ground are higher, way higher than we've seen since 1950s. But is it going to be enough to slow down what are going to be the productivity pain points? Or how big is it going to be? The estimates and the models, like I said, are placing it around 1 percentage point of GDP at the high end, with kind of the current tariffs. Of course, some of the astronomical announcements would be worse, but they backed off from that. But what we're actually seeing on the ground is, yeah, this is a real slowdown, and it's a slowdown of 0.5% to 1%. The Peterson Institute put out a study looking at since World War II, or since the 50s or whatever, since the newer age of globalization, because it started in the 50s. We all talk about China entering it in the 90s, and that's a big deal, but globalization has been a slow process since the 50s. In World War II, we thought fighting each other was pretty stupid. Maybe we should trade with each other instead. So they put a huge concerted effort to create these institutions, and it takes generations to create open trade. The annual average effect, they said today on the American family is thousands of dollars a year. Three to 10, because it's a whole range, $3,000 to $10,000 a year in your quality of life today is what we're enjoying every year. Due to international trade in America. That all is very much under threat. And so there's kind of this open question of how far are we going to go? Are we just going to put kind of these like 10% tariffs on everybody and call it good? And like everything's still fine? Or is it going to be the case that trade partnership with China will open up and we'll be left out so that we could have these long run ramifications? I mean, we're disrupting the global order of things, as we call it. The world that we built after World War II, which was designed to create world peace and successfully did so. I mean, relatively speaking, we've had way less wars and deaths since 1950 over the past 70 years than we had, even including Vietnam, even including Afghanistan and Iraq and all these bad things. It's still less than what it was before. I mean, the 1800s or the Napoleonic era, it was awful. People were dying everywhere. Tremendous amount of disruption, and all that is bad for economic growth. So stability by itself, global stability alone, adds to global economic prosperity. And Yeah, the effects aren't just for the American economy, but the global economy. I mean, the amount of people who used to live on less than $2 a day is rapidly vanishing. I think it's possible. Our kind of frontiers are some areas in Latin America, Southeast Asia, and of course Sub-Saharan Africa. But if trends continue within all of our lifetimes, that will be gone. Nobody will be living on $2 a day anymore. That amount of complete destitute subsistence level
Yeah.
living will be eliminated from the planet, and a lot of that is because of globalization, trade, and a turn toward markets that allocate our resources efficiently. Um, yeah, all that's a threat. So then the big question is, well, how big are we going to go? We don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that certainly is unanswerable. That's as the market is, gyrating around from day to day, trying to ask that $60,000 question, right?
How far are we going to go? And we don't know the long-term consequences. So the U.S. policy could settle down, but then we could see some ramifications a decade from now as global alliances change and global trade trust changes. The consequences from this could be felt for decades.
Yeah, it does seem like you would at least end up with a bipolar world where the U.S. tries to throw its arms around Latin America. Our supply chains are so
Yeah,
intertwined with Mexico and Canada, of course. And then China is kind of has its own sphere of influence throughout Asia. It's just, and Drew just wrote a great essay on this. China is just so much bigger and better and more efficient in manufacturing than anybody else. And it's just not close
right.
that, and sorry to take the words out of your mouth, Drew, but the odds, the ability for us to extricate ourselves from China is almost impossible.
It's just not many Foxconn models out there, right? I mean,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, a lot of questions about how far can we decouple. There was this move, friendshoring, for example,
Right.
move to Latin America or move to Southeast Asia, friendlier countries in Southeast Asia. That was a lot of talk before 2024, but now, after the election, once they announced these huge tariffs on Mexico and Colombia and all this stuff, uh, who's the friend anymore? Who's the friend to be friend-shored? So, there will be limits to that, but I mean, it's now we're really speculating. But what if China invades Taiwan, and can we really decouple from them, and all these kind of like war game scenarios, and can China even do this because they get all their oil through the strait down in Indonesia, and can't do they have a navy to control that or not? And huge like huge questions, like World War III giant questions here, where
Yeah.
the whole maps can change and everything can change. We're all trying to avoid that because peace makes everybody rich and war is a negative sum game that impoverishes most.
All right. Just to close out, do you have any thoughts for individual investors on this? I'm not looking for advice or anything like that, but where we started in terms of kind of misperceptions. And when you talk to investors, especially older investors, the boomers, what is it that you end up talking to them about? What are your thoughts for people like that?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't talk to many. Oh, I talk to my parents about their retirement.
But
Actually, my dad.
you're talking to mostly young kids.
Yeah, my median user on social media on TikTok or Twitter, Instagram is closer to 30ish. So, but my parents actually they just retired 2 weeks ago. My dad just retired 2 weeks ago. So, pretty exciting for him. Um, yeah, and I don't. What could I say that you guys wouldn't say even better? Just the standard of the economy can. So some people are worried about anxiety of an immediate recession, and what does that do to their retirement plans? The probability of a recession is always positive. It always could happen, but it's very hard to predict that. And no one is saying we're guaranteed a recession this year. Um, we're a lot of concern about the tariff talk that has calmed down. The current tariff projection is not enough to cause a major recession. I mean, I don't know what.
Yeah.
So I guess those are the questions they ask. Yeah, I will say this: no one can predict a business cycle. No one's ever done. And if someone is trying to promise it to you, then they're trying to sell something to you, because no one knows. There is
Well,
no
I guess
model
that
can
is,
accurately
look,
do it.
that is something that we talk about a lot, this uncertainty, right? So that's why we're not in the game of predictions. I always go out and say, I don't know the future, and neither do you, or neither do all the dudes who are really smart on CNBC. I don't care how much money you made as a hedge fund manager in your life, you do
Right.
not know the future,
No,
right?
no, it's survivorship bias. If you made a lot of money, you show up
Yeah.
on TV. If you did the same plan and didn't make money, the exact same plan and didn't make money, you don't show up on TV. And so we don't get what the median outcome is based upon just the folks who are lucky enough to be on the television.
All right. This was awesome. Christopher Clarke, Washington State University. Thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, it was a total
Thanks, Chris.
pleasure. Had a great time chatting. Thanks, you guys.